The morning they came to take her north, Maren did not weep. She had known it was coming the way you know a storm by the way the horses stand, all turned the same direction, ears flat, waiting. The Duke of Ashfeld had signed the order of seclusion on a Tuesday, as she would later learn, 3 days before his steward delivered it with a bow so courteous it might have been an invitation to dance. She stood at the window of the east wing, the one that looked over the frozen kitchen garden, and listened to the words without turning around. She had learned long ago that stillness was its own kind of armor. Those who could not read her face could not know what she cost them. The convent of St. Uriel in the Vorath passes, the steward read, which is to receive the Duchess of Ashfeld for purposes of spiritual renewal, such renewal to continue until the Duke shall see fit to recall her. He paused there, and she heard him fold the paper with the care of a man who hoped she might not ask him any questions. The conveyance is prepared for first light. Maren turned then. His name was Solarin, and she had kept his accounts for 2 years now, and she knew from the set of his jaw that he had not been told everything. She did not ask him what he had been told. "Is there a date of return?" she said, "or only the Duke's seeing fit?" He could not hold her eyes. "Only the latter, your grace." She had nodded once. That was all. She did not yet know that the order had been written by someone else's hand and only signed by her husband's, or that the evidence placed before him had been assembled across 6 months with the patience of a person who believed they would never be caught. Had she known, she thought later, she would have looked at Solarin differently, not with anger, but with the particular sharp pity of someone watching a man carry a lie he does not know, is lit at both ends. The journey took 9 days. The Vorath passes in deep winter are not cruel so much as indifferent. The cold does not want anything from you. It simply does not care whether you continue. She arrived at St. Uriel with 2 trunks, a small traveling case of books on military cartography and estate law she had packed herself over the steward's polite objections, and a letter she was not permitted to send. She would keep the letter. She would add to it. She did not yet know that keeping it would save everything. The convent sat at the top of a pass so narrow the wind came through it like an argument, and the sisters of St. Uriel were women of a particular kind, hardened not by cruelty but by usefulness, by the habit of doing what needed doing without being asked twice. The abbess, a compact woman named Theodine, met Maren at the gates with the expression of someone who had received aristocratic exiles before and had her own opinions about them. "We have a cell prepared," Theodine said. "It is modest. I am not troubled by modest," Maren said. The abbess studied her for a long moment in the thin gray light. She had a way of looking at you with her head very slightly to one side, the way a hawk looks at something it is considering, and Maren would later come to understand that this was how Theodine filed you, not by what you said, but by what you did not need to say. "There is work here," the abbess said finally. "If you want it." "I want it," Maren said. The external deadline had arrived 3 weeks before the convent gates swung shut behind her, though she had not recognized it for what it was at the time. The Duke of Ashfeld held his title by a tenure that required renewal of the ducal charter each 5th year, and the next renewal was set for the 1st of March, which was, as she would calculate that same evening by the candle in her cell, 11 weeks away. The charter required the Duke's signature, and by a provision of the original grant that no one had thought to remove in 2 centuries of routine renewal, the co-signature of his lawful consort. No one had ever needed that clause before. No one had considered it. She thought about it for a long time in the dark, listening to the wind coming through the pass like an argument, and then she opened the first of her cartography books and began to work. The Duke of Ashfeld's name was Corvin, and she had married him at 20 in a ceremony she remembered less for the vows than for the extraordinary effort it had cost her not to correct the chaplain on a point of heraldic law he got wrong. He was 32 then, and already what he would be for the next 4 years, tall, grave, still, with hands that bore the marks of real work that a man of his rank should long since have given to stewards, and a quality of composure that she had at first mistaken for coldness, and later learned to read as a particular kind of grief held very still. He had lost a brother. He did not speak of it. The loss sat in him the way an old injury sits in a joint, present, mostly quiet, making itself known at certain angles. She had not loved him when she married him. She was honest enough with herself to say that. She had respected him and been intrigued by him and believed that was a better foundation than most of what she observed in fashionable marriages. She had begun, somewhere in the 2nd year, to love him. She had not yet decided what to do about it when the order of seclusion arrived. This fact she kept in a separate ledger in her mind, one she did not open often, because the cost of looking at it was not something she could currently afford. What she could afford was work. And work in the convent of St. Uriel was not in short supply. The sisters kept the pass. This was their phrase for it, and it meant exactly what it said. The road through the Vorath Narrows was their responsibility, cleared and maintained and kept safe from the bandit parties that used the high ground in winter when the lower passes were watched. They had, over 2 generations of necessity, developed a system so efficient it bordered on military, and they had no one to teach the new sisters the theory behind it, because the abbess's deputy, a woman called Sister Rennick, who had apparently carried all of it in her head, had died in the autumn of a sudden fever. Maren looked at what remained of Sister Rennick's notes on the 3rd day and understood 2 things: that the system was brilliant, and that it had 3 structural failures that would kill someone before spring. She brought this to Theodine that evening. "You can see that," the abbess said. "I kept accounts and managed supply logistics for a duchy of 11 villages for 2 years, Maren said. "I can see it." Theodine looked at her with the hawk's tilt of the head. "What would you do about it?" Maren showed her. She stayed up 3 nights with the maps, which were old and partially wrong, and she corrected them from memory of what she had read in her traveling books, and she drew a revised system on the backs of 3 sheets of convent parchment and laid it before Theodine on the morning of the 4th day. The abbess did not thank her. She looked at the papers for a long time, then said, "You'll teach the young sisters the rotation." "Yes," Maren said. She did not think about Corvin while she was working. She thought about him only late at night, in the way you press a bruise, with the same mix of compulsion and knowledge that it is going to hurt. She thought about the signed order. She thought about the particular softness with which he had spoken to her once, in the library, over a contested passage in an estate survey, the way he had read her correction without defense and said very quietly that he had been wrong. She thought about who had told him what to sign. She had suspicions. She did not yet have proof. The proof arrived in the form of a visitor 6 weeks into her seclusion, which she had not expected at all. His name was Brother Castle, and he came up the pass with a mule and 2 letters, one for the abbess, one, improbably, for Maren herself, addressed in a hand she recognized immediately as Solarin's. She held the letter in the courtyard for a moment before breaking the seal, aware of Theodine watching her from the gate, aware of her own breathing. The letter was brief. Solarin wrote that he was taking a considerable risk and was aware of it, and that his conscience had driven him past the point of quiet. He had, in the course of his normal duties, come across a document he should not have seen, a letter, in a familiar handwriting, to a person called Vaskal. Vaskell was the name of the Duke's cousin by marriage, a woman of great beauty, great smoothness, and a claim to the duchy that became meaningful only in the event of the Duke dying without an heir or the current Duchess being formally dissolved from the marriage. The letter contained, among other things, a reference to a second letter, a letter, apparently, that had been shown to the Duke as proof of an intimacy between Marin and a man she had never met. Solarin did not know what the second letter said. He knew only that he had not written whatever it claimed he had witnessed. He was writing to her because he could not write to the Duke, and because he did not know what else to do. She read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in the traveling case with her cartography books and the letters she had been adding to in her cell. She did not feel triumph. She felt the cold, clean clarity of a person who has just identified the structural failure and knows exactly what to do about it. She went back to the young sisters and their rotation schedule. The snow had been falling for 3 days when he came, and she had given up expecting anyone. She was in the upper courtyard, supervising a group of 6 novices at timber hauling. They had been doing it wrong, wasting effort on the lift when the problem was the angle of approach. When she heard the bells at the outer gate, she did not stop what she was doing. She showed the novice called Petra the correct angle, waited until Petra found it and her load lightened, and then she turned around. The man at the gate was Corvin. He was alone, which was the first unexpected thing. He was on foot, which was the second, the horse visible some distance down the pass behind him, being held by a groom. He was dusted with snow to the shoulder, and his face was the color of a man who has been riding in cold air for many days and has not slept recently, and there was a quality in his stillness that was different from his ordinary stillness. The quality, she thought, of a man who has been wrong about something important and is not yet sure what to do with the fact of it. She wiped her hands on the work apron she was wearing. She did not move toward him. He crossed the courtyard. He stopped. He looked at her in the work apron, at the novices behind her, at the timber now correctly stacked in a way it clearly had not been this morning, and then he looked at her face. He said nothing. She waited. "You are well," he said finally, and it was not a question. "I am," she said. "I have been useful." Something crossed his face that she could not read immediately, which was unusual. She was generally fluent in his face. He was looking at her in the work apron and the corrected timber, as if he were recalculating something. "I was told," he said, very carefully, "that you wished to retire from the world." The word that rose in her was not anger. Anger would have been easier. It was the cold, clean thing again, the structural failure located feeling. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she said, "Who told you that?" He did not answer immediately. He had a habit, under pressure, of going still from the jaw first. She had observed this in estate negotiations and in arguments with his cousin Vaskell, and in the conversation they had never quite had about the library passage that he had been wrong about. The jaw went still. The rest of him followed. He said, "Vaskell brought me a letter." "Whose letter?" It appeared to be. He stopped. "Whose letter?" she said again, the same tone, not raised. The tone of someone who is doing arithmetic and wants to be sure of the figures. "It appeared to be Solarin's," he said. Attesting that you had expressed to him on multiple occasions a desire to, he stopped again. He looked at the timber. "I should have asked you directly." "Yes," she said, "you should have." The silence between them was long and specific. The young novices behind her had gone very quiet, with the professional discretion of women trained by Theodine. "Marin," he said, and her name in his mouth was a different register from his ordinary speech, not softer, but more careful, like a man carrying something he has almost dropped once. "You should come inside," she said. you should sit down, and I will tell you what I know, and then we will decide together what to do about the charter. The charter. She saw it land. He had not thought about the charter, or if he had thought about it, he had not yet put it together with March and her signature and the particular teeth that old provision had. The charter, he said. 11 weeks, she said. Now 7. Come inside. They sat in the abbess's receiving room, which was plain and cold and lit by a single lamp that Theodine had provided without comment before withdrawing. Marin put her letter on the table, the letter she had been writing for 6 weeks, the one that was not really a letter, but a document, a record of what she had observed, cross-referenced with account figures she had memorized, of discrepancies in the estate's correspondence records. Discrepancies that pointed to a very particular hand. Corvin read it without speaking. He read it a second time. His hands lay flat on the table, which was how she knew he was controlling something. This is Vaskell, he said. Yes, all of it. The accounts alone would not have been enough to bring before witnesses, but Solarin's letter and the accounts and... She reached into the traveling case and produced the second document, the one she had been saving. It was a bill of supply, dated 8 months ago. It was a bill for paper, ink, and a quantity of a particular sealing wax, the same wax used on the letter the Duke had received, which bore Solarin's seal. The bill was receipted in Vaskell's handwriting. Solarin had found it filed under the wrong heading, which was where it had been put by someone who did not know that Marin had spent 2 years keeping the accounts and could have told you where anything was filed. Corvin looked at it for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "She has been in my house for 9 years." "I know," Marin said. "She was my brother's." He stopped. She waited. This was the wound she had not been allowed to see. She did not reach for it or name it or hurry past it. She let it be in the room. "He was going to marry her," Corvin said finally, "before he died. I kept her close because of it. Because he would have wanted, he pressed his thumb against the edge of the bill of supply, a small gesture, almost nothing. I did not know she was." "I know," Marin said again. The silence was a different kind this time. She understood something she had not quite understood before, that his coldness, his gravity, his quality of perpetual stillness, all of it was a man who had been keeping a promise to a dead brother while being quietly poisoned by the person that promise required him to protect. She felt, for him, something very clean and very sharp that she had no name for yet, though she recognized its weight. "The charter requires my signature," she said. "I will give it, because it is the right thing, and because the estate is good land with good people on it, and I am not willing to see it come apart over a thing that can be fixed." "But Corvin..." He looked up. "We need witnesses. We need to bring this before someone who can receive it formally, and we need to do it before March, and we need Vaskell in a room where she cannot leave before it is done." He held her eyes. She had never seen him look at her quite that way, as if he were reading something he had not known was there, and finding it unexpectedly legible. "You have a plan," he said. It was not quite a question. "I have had 7 weeks," she said, "and this is a very good library." The letter came to Vaskell at the end of the week, on ducal letterhead, in Corvin's hand, and it requested her presence at Ashfeld for a formal review of the estate accounts in preparation for the charter renewal. It was entirely ordinary. It was exactly the sort of letter a duke might send his trusted cousin in advance of an important administrative event. There was no reason for her to suspect anything, except that Marin had always believed that people who have been doing something wrong hear a particular note in ordinary communications, the note of the thing that has not yet been said. They had come down from the pass together in the second week of February, Corvin and Marin, with Theodine's small, dry benediction, "Try not to waste what you were sent here to learn," and Solarin waiting with 2 horses at the pass's foot, looking like a man who had committed himself entirely and was glad of it and terrified in equal measure. "You sent the letter," Marin said. "I did, Your Grace, thank you." She let that land for a moment. "You were brave." His throat worked. He nodded. He was not a man given to open feeling, and she respected that and did not prolong it. "The accounts," she said. "I want to see them the moment we arrive." The House of Ashfeld received her as if she had been away a season, rather than the better part of 2 months, which was to say that the servants who had liked her were openly glad and tried not to show it too plainly, and the ones who had not were carefully neutral, and Corvin's housekeeper, a woman of 60 named Brigg, who had served in the house since the old Duke's time and had been giving everyone her opinion, solicited or not, for 4 decades, met her in the entrance hall, looked her up and down, said, "You've got snow still in your hair," and handed her a wool shawl with the decisive manner of a woman who has been waiting to do exactly that for weeks. "Thank you, Brigg," Marin said. "There's a kettle on," Brigg said. "And you'll want it." This was Brigg's preferred form of welcome, and Marin had long since learned that it meant, "You are necessary here, and I am glad you are back," rendered into the only language Brigg had for affection. Corvin, behind her, caught Marin's eye with the particular expression of a man watching 2 people he cares about communicate in a dialect he has never quite managed to learn. And she saw it, for the first time, clearly, without any ambiguity, the ghost of a smile. She held it in her mind like a coin. Vaskell arrived on the 17th of February, 3 days before the accounts review, as was her habit. Arriving early to a thing was a form of control that she had practiced for so long she likely did not notice doing it anymore. She was, as Marin remembered, immaculate, beautiful in the particular way of a woman who had put serious effort into appearing naturally so, with a gift for entering rooms in a way that suggested they had been arranged in expectation of her. She embraced Corvin. She greeted Marin with warmth so polished it was nearly convincing. "You look well," Vaskell told her. "The North suited you." "It did," Marin said. "I learned a great deal." Vaskell smiled. It was a lovely smile, and there was, at its edge, something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite contempt, some precise mixture of the two that Marin filed and did not react to. What Vaskell did not know, that Corvin had written, quietly, to his old military steward, a man named Ferreth, who held the Duke's proxy power in legal matters. That Ferreth was currently in residence on the estate, occupying a guest room in the East Wing, that the accounts had already been reviewed, that the bill of supply had already been copied, and the original was in Ferreth's keeping, that Solarin had spent 4 evenings writing out, in full, a statement of everything he had observed, and filed it under Ferreth's seal. That Marin had found, in the estate's correspondence archive, in the hours between arrival and Vaskell's appearance, one more document, a draft of the letter supposedly written by Solarin, in Vaskell's hand, with 2 corrections in a different shade of ink, filed under a ledger entry that referenced a completely unrelated matter and would have been invisible to anyone who did not know that the ledger system had been reorganized 8 months ago, and the old index was wrong. She had been keeping accounts for a duchy. She knew where everything was. The review was set for the morning of the 19th in the estate's great hall, which doubled as its formal chamber when formal chambers were required. Corvin had invited, in addition to Farath, 2 neighboring estate holders whose presence at significant events was customary under the charter, people who could be called as witnesses if needed, which Marin had suggested in her plan, and Corvin had agreed to without discussion. He had read her plan in Theodine's receiving room and said, afterward, with the quiet precision of a man making a concession to evidence, "You are very good at this." "I know," she said. "I am sorry it took a crisis to demonstrate it." Something in his face did the small thing she had only ever seen it do when he was caught by something he had not expected. He had looked at the floor for a moment and said, "The crisis was not your fault." "No," she said. "It was not." This was the closest they had come to it. The ledger she did not open often was very heavy. She put it back on its shelf. Vaskell came down to breakfast on the morning of the 19th in an ivory dress that was probably not coincidental to the occasion, and she sat at the table with the ease of a woman who believed she knew how this morning was going to go. Marin watched her pour her tea. There was a ring Vaskell wore on her right hand that she had always worn, a small cabochon stone in a plain setting, unremarkable, and yet she touched it when she was composing herself, the way some people touch a charm. Marin had noticed this 2 years ago. She had filed it then as a nerves habit. She reread it now as something older and more complicated, and made a note to herself that she would not be unkind at the end, whatever it cost her. They walked to the great hall together, all of them, at 9 in the morning, with the thin February sun coming through the high windows and lying in bars on the stone floor. Ferreth was already there, standing at the head of the long table with his proxy seal visible on its chain. The 2 neighboring estate holders, a man called Harrow and a woman called Embit, both well past 60 and possessed of the particular alertness of people who had learned that being invited to things at short notice usually meant something interesting was happening, were seated to one side, attentive. Solarin was there too. He stood against the wall near the door, and when Vaskell entered and saw him, there was a pause, very small, a hesitation of perhaps 1 second that no one who was not looking for it would have seen. Marin saw it. Corvin opened the review in the formal terms. He said that the charter renewal required the accounts to be reviewed and certified before witnesses, and that there were certain questions that had arisen in the accounts that required resolution before certification could proceed. He was calm. He was always calm. His voice never varied. This was, Marin had come to understand, not the absence of feeling, but its most concentrated form, everything pressed down until it was cold and dense and very hard. Vaskell said, pleasantly, that she was happy to assist in any way. Corvin said that would be helpful. He nodded to Ferrath. Ferrath produced the accounts. The review took the better part of an hour, and most of it was, in fact, genuine accounts work, figures read aloud, confirmed, cross-referenced. Vaskell participated with assurance. She was competent. Marin had never doubted that. She had been managing the back channel of the Ashfeld correspondence for years, which required both organizational ability and the capacity to hold contradictory stories in mind without confusing them. She was, in the way of truly dangerous people, very good at her work. Ferreth laid the letter on the table. It was the letter that had been shown to Corvin as proof, Solarin's letter, ostensibly, testifying to Marin's expressed wish to enter seclusion. This document, Ferreth said, in the level tones of a man who had been doing this for 30 years and had learned to let documents do their own speaking, was presented to the Duke of Ashfeld on the 4th of December as an attestation by his estate steward, Solarin. I have here a second document. He produced Solarin's written statement, a declaration from Solarin himself, made under seal 5 days ago, in which he states clearly that he did not write the first letter, has no knowledge of its contents before seeing it for the first time 3 days ago, and has never attested to anything regarding the Duchess's wishes. A silence. Vasquel's hand lay flat on the table in front of her. She was looking at the documents with an expression of polite concern, which was a remarkable performance, and Marin respected it even now. "That is a very serious discrepancy," Vasquel said. "Is Solarin quite certain?" "Memory is, I am certain." Solarin's voice from the wall was not loud, but it was very clear. She turned to look at him. He did not look away. "I have been certain since December," he said. "I did not speak sooner because I was afraid, and I am ashamed of that, and I am not afraid now." The silence was different after that. Harrow and Embit had gone very still, with the stillness of people who have understood that they were invited here for a reason. Ferrith said, "There is also this." He produced the bill of supply. He read it aloud. The date, the quantities, the items, paper, ink, sealing wax, the specific formulation. He placed it beside the first letter. He said nothing. The sealing wax they were currently looking at on the false letter and the sealing wax described in the receipt were the same. This was visible. This required no argument. Then he produced the draft. He held it to the light from the high window, because the second shade of ink, the corrections, showed most clearly in strong light. He read it aloud. He read it as one reads a thing that needs no commentary, plainly, at moderate pace, with no performance, because a document that says what this one said did not require a performer. It was Vasquel's handwriting, both stages of it. The corrections were in her hand. The document purporting to record Solarin's attestation had been drafted, corrected, and prepared by someone who had access to Solarin's seal. "Where did you find that?" Vasquel said, and it was the first moment her voice changed, not broke, not cracked, but shifted register, losing about half its polish, revealing the note underneath that Marin had always been able to hear. In the accounts, Marin said quietly, "Where you filed it." Vasquel looked at her then, really looked at her for perhaps the first time, with the appraisal of a woman who has spent years deciding whether another person was worth worrying about, and has just received her answer too late. There was, in that look, something that was not purely calculation, something older and more human, and Marin, who had promised herself she would look for it, found it: grief. Not regret, not shame, not the surface emotions. Grief for Corvin's brother, dead 8 years, and for the position she had been in since, second to a dead man's memory, held at a certain distance by the person she had loved the shape of, given responsibility without standing, given proximity without center. It had curdled into this. It was not an excuse. It was an accounting, and the account was honest. Marin looked at that grief and felt it land. Corvin had not moved during any of this. He stood at the head of the table in the thin February light, and he was so still that the room arranged itself around him. He said, finally, "Vasquel." She turned to him. Her composure had come back, the professional grade of it, the kind that had been built over years. But her hand had gone to the ring with the cabochon stone, and Marin saw it, and remembered when she had filed it and what she had reread it as this morning, and did not say anything. "You are my brothers," Corvin said, and he meant it in a very specific way, not possession, but provenance, legacy, the fact that Callum had loved her, and that this was a debt Corvin had considered himself to owe. "And you have been in this house for 9 years, and I trusted you with the parts of this house that I could not always watch, and you have used that trust to—" He stopped. His jaw had gone still. "I am not going to enumerate it. You know what you have done." Vasquel said nothing. "Harrow," Corvin said. "Embit, you have seen these documents. They had. They confirmed it carefully in the formal phrases." "Ferath will record the transfer," Corvin said. The house in the western village, which was given to you by my brother's will, is yours and remains yours. You will receive the quarterly income from it as long as you live, because that was his wish, and his wish stands. You will not remain at Ashfeld. You will not enter correspondence with anyone on this estate. You will not. His voice did something, a very small thing, a fraction of weight settling. You will be well provided for. Go and be well. Vaskell stood for a moment. She looked at Corvin with the expression of a woman looking at something she had wanted for a very long time and had just lost the last possible angle on. And then she looked at Marin. And the grief was there again, surfaced and plain. She said nothing. She inclined her head in the courtesy that required no warmth. She walked out of the great hall. She did not look back. That, Marin thought, was its own kind of dignity. Brigg, who had been stationed near the hall door for reasons she had never been asked about because no one had needed to ask, was heard to say in the corridor a moment later, "There's a conveyance at the gate for you." "I've had your trunks packed. Pause, you'll have enough pins. I know where you keep them." Another pause. Briefer. Well then, nothing further. Marin, who knew Brigg, understood the nothing further as, "And that is the end of that, and we will not speak of it again." Which was exactly correct. The hall had gone quiet with the particular quality of a room after a storm, not empty, but rinsed. Harrow and Embett were accepting a glass of the estate's wine from a servant who had appeared from somewhere. Solarin was standing where he had been standing, against the wall, with the careful stillness of a man who has done the thing he was afraid to do and is waiting to find out what it costs. Corvin looked at him. "You kept your word," he said. Eventually, Solarin agreed. His voice was steadier than Marin expected. "I am aware of the timeline. So am I." Corvin was quiet for a moment. "So is your Duchess." He glanced at Marin, and she nodded once, which was enough. "You will keep your position," Corvin said to Solarin, "and we will not speak of December except to say that you corrected a wrong at considerable risk to yourself, and the estate is in your debt." Solarin's throat moved. He said, "Thank you, Your Grace." "Thank her," Corvin said. "She is the one who asked me to." Solarin looked at Marin. Marin looked back. She said, "You were brave when it mattered. That is the only part of it that history keeps." Then Harrow, who had been quietly consuming his wine with the expression of a man who has just received full value for an otherwise unremarkable February morning, said to Embett, in a carrying undertone, "Well, I did wonder why we'd been invited." Embett said, "Hush." Harrow said, "I am hushing." "I am merely noting, hush," Embett said, with the fond finality of a woman who has been hushing the same voice for 40 years and has no expectation of success. The hall began to empty. Brigg made a remark about the luncheon. The servant with the wine made 2 more circuits. Ferreth gathered his documents with the efficiency of a man who had done his work and considered it done. The thin February light had moved, in the course of the morning, from bars on the floor to a wider, lower wash that caught the edge of the table and made the grain in the old wood glow. Corvin and Marin were the last ones in the hall. He was standing at the window, looking out at the kitchen garden, frozen still. The same garden she could see from her east wing window, the same one she had been looking at when Solarin read the order in December. She thought about that, and thought about the way distance works on knowledge, how you could stand in the same place, looking at the same view, and understand it entirely differently, depending on what you had learned in the interval. She stood beside him, not close, not far. He said, "You had that draft since you arrived, since the second morning," she said. "You waited. I needed the room and the witnesses." She paused. "And I needed you to see it yourself, not be told. There is a difference." He was quiet for a long time. The kitchen garden sat there, dormant and patient. In the convent, he said, 7 weeks. 6.5. Were you? He stopped. He tried again with a different approach, the way a man tries a different door when the first is locked. Did you know you would come back? She considered this honestly. I knew about the charter, she said. That was the first thing. I knew that was a door that was going to open eventually, whatever you decided when it opened. And I knew. She stopped. I knew that you had been shown a lie, and that the lie was specific, and that specific lies have specific authors, and that authors leave evidence because they are careful and not quite careful enough, and I had 7 weeks and a very good library. So yes, I knew I would come back. He turned from the window. He looked at her. The long, specific look of the grave lead she had been cataloging for 4 years, the one she could read best of all the expressions he had. There was something in it she had not seen before, and she named it to herself plainly. It was the look of a man who has been standing in front of something and turned around and found it very large. I should have asked you directly, he said. In December. Yes, I should have. There are a number of things. He stopped. This was unusual. He was not a man who stopped in the middle of sentences. I have not been. Another stop. He looked at his hands. The working man's hands, the ones that had no business on a duke, and that she had always thought about more than she should. I have been managing this house as if it were a problem to solve alone, he said. As if asking anyone to share the load were. The jaw went still for a moment, as if it were an imposition. I know, she said. You, he looked up. You knew that. I kept your accounts, she said. I kept your correspondence. I sat across from you in that library for 2 years and corrected you when you were wrong, and you thanked me for it, and then you, she stopped, and made herself say the rest of it. Because they were past the point where not saying was useful. And then you sent me north without asking. It landed. She watched it land. He did not flinch from it, because he was not a man who flinched, but she saw it reach him. Yes, he said. I did. Because Vaskil brought you a letter, she said, and you decided, alone, that you knew what it meant and what to do about it. And you managed it the way you manage everything, by deciding who can be spent to protect what, without telling anyone that you are making that decision. Silence, that is your flaw, she said. The unilateral protection. Standing in front of people instead of beside them. It is not unkindness. But it is not, she found the word. It is not partnership. He was very still. I am not saying this, she said, to wound you. I am saying it because we are doing the accounting honestly, and that is what honest accounting looks like. He said, I know. Good, she said. Another silence, but a different kind. The kitchen garden sat in its thin light. Marin, he said. Yes, the charter requires your signature. He said it carefully, the way a man chooses words for a thing he wants to not be contaminated by other meanings, but is aware might be. I know, she said. They are separate. Yes, he held her eyes. They are entirely separate, and I want. He stopped again. She waited, not impatiently, because she had learned that he got there eventually if she did not hurry him. I want to ask you something that has nothing to do with the charter, he said, and I want you to hear it as having nothing to do with the charter. I hear it that way, she said. Ask. Stay, he said. Not as the Duchess, not for the accounts, as the word seemed to require some assembly, as the person who corrects me when I am wrong and does not stop when I don't like it, and who can look at broken things and see what needs fixing, and who told me in the abbess's cold room that the way out was through the middle, in the light, with witnesses. He looked at her steadily. "I have been wrong about a great many things," he said. "I am not wrong about this, but I will only take yes if you mean it freely." The kitchen garden. The thin light. The sound of Briggs somewhere in the house issuing instructions to someone who probably didn't need them. "You told me once, in the library, that you had been wrong about the survey. I remember. You said it very quietly. I thought at the time that it was the most remarkable thing I had heard in a long time. A man with your title saying that, with no performance and no qualification." She looked at him. "That was when I knew." She paused. "I have known for about a year. I have been waiting for you to ask." He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, with a quality she had not heard in his voice before, lighter, slightly unsteady, as if he were unsure of the ground, "You might have said something." "You were the one with the question," she said. "I was not going to ask it for you." The ghost of the smile was no longer a ghost. It arrived fully, and it was the tracked milestone, the first real one, unheld back, reached, and it changed his face considerably, and she thought, "There it is, the thing I have been waiting to see properly." She had the strong impression that he knew she was cataloging it and did not mind. "Will you marry me?" he said. "Because you wish it. That is the only reason I will take." "Yes," she said. "Because I wish it. And also," she added, "because you have been wrong about the kitchen garden drainage for 2 years and someone needs to fix it." He laughed. It was a real laugh, startled out of him, the kind that doesn't have time to be composed. And she thought, "I will keep that." She would keep it the way she had kept the letter, adding to it carefully, in a case she did not often open, but that was very, very full. The charter was signed that afternoon, before Ferreth and Harrow and Embit, who had stayed for luncheon on the reasonable grounds that they had already stayed for everything else. Briggs served the food with the manner of a woman officiating at an important ceremony, which in Briggs' estimation she was. Solarin sat at the far end of the table and ate in the careful silence of a man who is learning that relief feels different from how he expected. They were married in April, in the estate's small chapel, with so few guests that Briggs declared afterward it was practically a secret, though she said this with the warm outrage of a woman who got to be there and knew it. Harrow wept, which surprised everyone, including Harrow. Embit handed him her handkerchief without looking at him. Theodine had sent a letter from the convent that was 3 sentences long and warmer than anything she had ever said aloud. Brother Castle, who had carried Solarin's letter up the pass, was given a place at the table. Vaskell lived in the western village house and kept to herself, and in time the quarterly income allowed her to travel, and she traveled. And the reports that came back about her over the years were of a woman who had found, at some distance from everything she had wanted, a smaller and more sustainable life. Marin, when she heard these reports, thought about the grief and the ring and the long arithmetic of second place, and was glad of what had been kept for her. Solarin served out another decade as steward, grew increasingly fond of his own opinion about every subject, and was eventually succeeded by his daughter, who had also grown up keeping the accounts and correcting everyone when they were wrong, and whom Corvin therefore trusted implicitly, and Briggs adored. Briggs herself did not retire until she was 74, at which point she announced that she had decided to do so, and that she expected it would not affect the running of the house, since she would continue to say what she thought whenever she thought it, which turned out to be exactly correct. Ferreth returned to his own estate and wrote, in his memoirs, a brief account of the February morning that described the whole affair as a remarkably efficient piece of legal work and attributed it accurately. The memoirs were popular in the region for many years. Harrow and Embet continued to be invited to things and continued to provide good company at them. and the betting book in their village had, under the entry for the previous August, a notation that several people had been foolish enough to bet against the cold-eyed Duchess of Ashfeld and had rightly lost, which Marin found out about eventually and was quietly pleased by. The kitchen garden drainage was fixed by September. She was right about it. Nearly a year after the morning they had stood at the window, in the first warm light of a turning spring, Corvin found her in the east wing. She was at the window, the same window, looking at the kitchen garden, which was no longer frozen, which was running properly, which had a green shoot coming up in the corner where the drainage had failed before. He stopped in the doorway. She heard him stop. She said, without turning, "There is something I cannot yet decide whether to lay before you." He said, "Is that so? It will require some thought." "It generally does," he said, "with you." She heard him cross the room. He stopped beside her, close, looking at the same garden. The spring light was on the stone floor, moving the way light moves on a floor in a room with a south-facing window in April, slowly and without purpose and very warm. She turned and looked at him, and he looked at her, and she said, "I believe it will be very expensive." He considered this. He reached over and took her hand in his, the working hand, the one that had no business on a duke. "Then," he said, "we will keep the accounts together." There it was, the oldest thing she had said to him, the first agreement between them, the phrase that had been shorthand for everything, spending and keeping, cost and worth, the slow redemption of transaction into gift. He had handed it back to her transformed, the way she had always known he would, and it meant now what it had always been waiting to mean. The green shoot in the corner of the garden, the warm light on the floor, the sound, somewhere outside, of a blackbird starting its morning in the new-leaved trees, the same blackbird that had been singing through every scene of this, indifferent and faithful and still going strong. If this story warmed you, if you have ever been the one who kept the accounts no one looked at, who stayed still when it cost something, who knew the truth would come out eventually, because the truth always does if you are patient and have a very good library, then pull your chair a little closer. There is always another evening here, and always a kettle on, and the fire does not go out. Tell me, in the comments, what moment you would have needed most in that convent. The letter from Solarin, the knowledge about the charter, or simply the abbess and her question, "Do you want work?" And if you want more evenings like this one, there is a place kept for you by the fire. Come back, sleep well, and be gentle with the ones who kept your lamp lit.